The very first question he asked me was the most awaited question: tell me about yourself and what kind of projects you have worked on. So I told him about myself, and the projects I have worked on was the banking, healthcare, and e-commerce domains. Then he said, what is the most important thing in a banking application? I said, well, the most important thing is security because in banking application, users' money and personal data is involved. Then the interviewer asked, how do you achieve security? Well, I said security can be achieved in multiple ways. It totally depends on the kind of the application. Like if I take the example of banking application only, then there are two kind of securities we can implement. One is authentication and one is authorization. Authentication is nothing but the user has to log in first to enter the website. They just need to verify who they are. And authorization means after logging in, what parts of the application the user has access to. So for example, if a normal user log in into a website, banking website, versus a admin log in into a banking website. So admin might see some extra screens than the normal user sees. To achieve the authorization, we can use JWT, that is JSON Web Tokens. Okay, after that, since I had mentioned that I have worked on e-commerce projects as well, so he was quite interested in the e-commerce projects. So he asked me this question that e-commerce websites are usually used and they have, giant code repos because in the e-commerce website, there are so many things. You have payment section, you have your product detail section, you have your offer section and whatnot. And he said it becomes quite difficult to manage such big code repos. Then what was your team's approach to handle this problem? Okay, to answer that, I said yes, it's actually quite difficult to manage big code repos. So for that, we had used the concept of monorepo and micro frontends. Micro frontend is simply a process of dividing a single application into multiple parts. And one part is called one micro frontend. And when you combine all those part of the application, it becomes micro frontends. So for example, if I talk about Flipkart, it has a payment section, it has an offer section, it has an add to cart functionality. Correct. Now what happens in the industry, the team is divided on the basis of the parts of the application. So for example, there is a team who only takes care of the payment functionality in the application. Other team only talks about the offers displayed to the user. Now each team has their own Git repository, and that is called micro frontend. Whereas mono repo, as the name suggests, mono means single, repo is a Git repository where all the micro frontend finds a common home is called mono repo. And the concept of this mono repo and micro frontends has so many advantages. One of the biggest advantage is we can deploy new feature at different rates for different parts of the application. And one of the another greatest advantage of micro frontend is it lets the team choose the suitable technology for their micro frontend. And then he said, let's have a coding round as well. And he asked me to open any IDE of my choice and share my screen. So let me do that. Okay, once I had opened my code sandbox, the interviewer asked me, tell me your two favorite JavaScript topics. After thinking, I said arrow functions and destructuring. And then he asked me to write two examples, one where arrow function makes more sense to use over a regular function, and the other example is where a regular function makes more sense to use over the arrow function. Okay, so first I'm going to write an example where arrow function makes more sense over a regular function. For that, I'm going to delete it and I'm going to take a new array of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. And here I just want to double each number. For that, I'm going to say double is equal to array dot map is a number and num into 2, and then I'm just going to print it. We can see the array has been each element of the array has been doubled. Correct. Now here I can achieve the same thing with regular function as well, but arrow function makes more sense here because if I write a regular function here, let me write and show you called return. Now also it's working similar, but the problem is we have to write the return keyword because the regular function does not have implicit return. We also had to add this curly braces. Basically, it's a longer syntax, one, and second, it does not have the implicit return. Now, if I use arrow function, I do not need to return anything because it implicitly returns that. So if I do this, I can remove this curly bracket as well. And now, because since it is a one-liner code, arrow function has the implicit return and it automatically returns the computed value and we get the doubled values. So here, using an arrow function would make more sense over a regular function. The second example I took was to show that where a regular function makes more sense over the arrow function. So for that, I'm going to go into index.html and here I'm going to write a button. It says click me. You can see the button here. Let me clear the console. And now let's go to index.css and I'm going to comment it. And in the second example, what I'm going to do is const button and I'm going to get that button here. For that, let's add a ID as well. Let's say the ID is btn and in the index.js btn equals to document dot get element by ID and then pass the button ID, that's btn. Now I'm going to add a event listener to it. Click event listener and here if I use the regular function, let's say this, and the idea is whenever I click this button, click me, the text should change to clicked. Okay. So for that, what I'm going to do is this dot inner HTML equals to clicked. Okay. Now let me clear the console. And when I click the button, you can see the text has been changed. But now if I change it to arrow function, clear the console. And now if I click it, it says cannot set properties of undefined. And it is setting this property in HTML. So here this keyword is undefined because arrow function does not have their own this. They pick it from the outside, from basically the upper scope. So here using a regular function makes much more sense than using a arrow function. The next question he asked me was on destructuring the objects. So he said take any object of your choice, but the object should be nested and just destructure any two properties from that. So for that, let me comment it. And what I had done is I had taken an object called user. And there I just said written a name ABC. And then he had asked me to use an object, basically a nested object. So I written address and inside the address, there was a street field, which was 123. And now he wanted me to destructure this name and street property from the user object. So for that, what I had done is, and I can destructure name because it is at level 1, and then the street is at level 2. So for that, first I need to destructure address, and inside the address, there is this street. He wanted me to console them, both of the properties. So name and street. So now you can see here is the name and here is the street. And once I had done that, he asked me the real question. He said, let's say this object data is coming from an API, and due to some reason, this data is null. So let me do that. The moment I change it to null, application is broken because we can see the error here. Now he wanted me to fix it. So he wanted me to add some null checks while destructuring, so that even if this value is null, the application should not break. So since this is a nested destructuring, actually I had wrapped this into an object and spread it. So previously the error was that cannot read property name, but now it says cannot read property street because it is nested. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out and I'm going to write and again wrap it into object and spread it. Okay. With that, you can see it is printing undefined, undefined, but the application is not breaking. Third question he asked me was, what is callback hell? Write an example of it. And is there any alternative to get around it? Comment it out. I taken a simple example of multiply, which takes a number. And what it does is it passes this value to another function. And let's write that another function that's called multiply by 2. It takes number, and what it does is it returns num into 2. And you know the callback hell is usually occurs when there is some asynchronous processes involved. So to mimic the asynchronous process, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a set timeout here. So let's write that. Basically, it will delay the output for, let's say, 400 milliseconds. And I'm going to cut it and paste it here, and I can take this return off. Now, after 4 seconds, I mean, after 400 milliseconds, this set timeout will run and execute this logic. Now we need to somehow return this. So for that, I'm going to use a callback here, which will be passed by this multiply method. We'll see that in a while. So here, I'll just call the callback method here and return and pass the calculated value to it. Okay. Now the next thing is inside the multiply function, I'm going to call this multiply by 2 method. Here I'm going to pass whatever value I'm going to get from the user. Multiply by 2 method also takes a callback, correct? So we can pass a arrow function here. And in the callback, I get the calculated result from here, correct? So I can use that result 2. And let's also create a scenario when there could be some error. For that, let's say this callback returns two things. One is error and one is the result. Here, this is the result. And in the left side, I'm going to write the error. So let's say for a while, this is undefined, which means there are no errors as of now. But if there is something go wrong, then this undefined will have that error, and we can check if there is some error, then we can take some action in this method, correct? So here what I'm going to write is, if first of all I'm going to check if there is no error, then call this multiply by 2 method again and pass the result which is available from the last call. So that is result 2. I'll pass it here, then again use a callback. And this time I'm just going to console log the result 4. Okay. And now let's say this for the first condition, if there is some error. So here I'm going to add a else condition, which simply says console log error in first call. Okay. Now the second if condition, and now let's call this multiply method and pass the value 10 to it. Here you can see it has printed 80 because so first time it returns 20, then it returns 40, and here it returns 80. It's working fine, but the problem is you can see our code has grown a lot, and this is growing from left to right side. So here from here to here to here, right? And now, guys, this is called callback hell. And now to get around it or to fix it, what we can do is we can use the concept of promises. For that, we simply need to return a new promise here. Promise takes a callback, and we can move the entire logic inside the promise. So when we are using promise, this callback is not required. So I can delete the callback. And inside the promise anonymous function, it has two parameters. One is resolve and one is reject. Resolves if resolve signifies that your promise was successful, whereas reject signifies that there was some error. So here, since we had deleted the callback from here, we can delete the callback from here as well. And we can call this resolve instead and pass the value num into 2. It returns a promise now. Okay. So instead of taking this callback hell route, what we can do is let me comment it, multiply by 2, then pass the number to it. And the promises has this then and catch block. So here I can write data. Data is nothing but the computed value you get from the promise. And then again, I can call multiply by 2 and say data and console dot log. Let me write here data and data. Okay. With that, you can see it is still printing 80. It is working similar to a callback, but you can see we have less code than the callback hell. And of course, we can add the catch block here. So I can write catch. And if there is some error, I'm just going to print that. Let's say error is error. The next question he asked me was a output based question. And the question was this. So he wanted me to tell what this console log will print and why. After thinking, my answer was after a delay of 1 second, it will print undefined. Why? Because set timeout is taking this function as a callback, but it calls this method as a regular function only. And inside the regular function, this refers to the window object. So here, after 1 second, this keyword will refer to the window object and window dot message would be undefined. So let's see that if I uncomment it, you can see undefined is printing. Now to fix it, one way is, okay, let me comment it first. And one way is I simply call it like this, object dot log message and call it. So that you can see hello world is printed. And the other way is if you want to fix it using set timeout only. So let me, it is printing undefined as of now. Let me clear the console. What we can do is we can use the arrow function here and now just call it. With that, you can see hello world is printed because now this method is not called as a regular function. That's why this keyword refers to the object itself. And then object dot message is hello world. That's why it is printing that. And then after asking so many questions from the JavaScript, he said we have so many things to do in JavaScript. Then why do we even need React.js? And what are the features of React? So to answer that question, I said front-end frameworks and libraries are the essential part of web development process. It makes developers' life easy. Uh, these libraries and frameworks are used to build high-performing, responsive websites and web-based applications. And React is one of these libraries, the front-end libraries, which is used to create user interfaces for websites and application. React mainly focuses on the building the view layer of the application. It also has a robust ecosystem and a remarkable flexibility. And the feature of React is the first and the foremost is it uses the virtual DOM. Then we can write our code in JSX, which is HTML like structure. It has a large development community, and in React everything is a component, so we can create reusable components. And with the latest version of React, we can use React hooks as well, which makes our code lighter. And we have hooks like use state, use effect, which can replace the lifecycle methods. The next question he asked me is what happens if you update the state directly? Then I said React keeps a track all its virtual DOM. Whenever a change happen in the application, maybe a probe changes or a state changes, all the components are re-rendered. And React creates a new virtual DOM, and then this newly created virtual DOM is compared with the previously built virtual DOM. And now only the differences found are reflected in the original DOM. But what happens is when we mutate the state directly, it will change the reference of the state in the previous virtual DOM as well. So now React does not know what has actually changed, and it won't be able to see that there is a change of state. And so it would not reflect it in the original DOM until we reload the screen. There are times when we are using React.pure component or some other uh, performance optimizing techniques. And there also, if we are updating the state directly, it can lead to some logical bugs and components will become hard to optimize. And then the interviewer said, let's assume there is a state in one of your component and that state is required in 10 different components of your application. How would you pass that data across various components? Okay, the answer is there are multiple ways to pass the data from one component to multiple component. One is we can use Redux, and the other way is we can use the context API. Okay, the last question he asked me was create an input box in React, and he wanted me to print the user input value only when the user has stopped typing. Okay, so first of all, let's create a input box here that I'm going to write input. And then here I'm going to pass value equals to this value, and that going to be a on change handler, says handle change. Okay, here I can write that handle change. Okay, with that, hopefully whatever I type should be logged out. So if I type A, B, C, okay, I need to add the console log as well for that. So let me add console log here. Or a better idea would be to use a use effect here. Whenever the value changes, we can print the value. So we can pass the value in the dependency string. And here I'm going to say console.log the value. Save it. And here, let me type something. So now you can see it is printing A, AB, and ABC. On every key press, it is printing that. But the interviewer wants me to print the value only when the user has stopped typing. So for this example, after typing ABC, the user has stopped typing, then only ABC should be printed here, not A and AB. So for that, I can use a concept called debouncing. For that, let me create a new file called hooks.js. And I'm going to create a new hook called use debounce. The concept of debouncing is simply the process of delaying something. So here we are delaying the printing of the entered value, correct? So that is debouncing. This debounce hook takes two values. One is input value and one is the delay. That is for how much time we want to delay it. And for this example, I'm going to write a default value here that is 300 milliseconds. Okay, here I'm going to use some states. Then I can use the use effect as a callback here. And I'm going to create a timeout. Now set timeout takes a callback. And here I'm going to call this set debounced value and pass the input value here. The second argument, the set timeout take is the time. So we can pass the delay here. Okay. After that, so here we have created the timer, but we need to clear it also. So for that, I'm going to return. This use effect also takes a dependency array. So here it depends on two things. One is the input value and one is the delay. And then we can return the debounced value. Okay. And let's export it, sorry. With that, our use debounce function hook is ready. Let's go to the app.js and I'm going to import what we have created there. So let me copy it from there. It's called use debounce. Paste it here from. Okay, now here let's copy it and paste it here. And this is called use debounce. And the initial value would be the value which is user is typing, and it returns. So here in the hooks, you can see it returns the debounced value. So let me get that here, debounced value. And now here in the use effect, instead of passing the value, I'm going to pass debounced value and I'll print the debounced value. Okay, let's save that, clear the console. Now I'm going to type ABC again. Now you can see it has been printed only once. I hope you have learned something new and it would help you in clearing your next interview. Please let me know in the comment section if there is any feedbacks or if I have missed something.